Hi, I'm Mike Cronin from the Awesome Business Journal, and we're just going to jump right in. I'll let these guys introduce themselves.
Hi, Cody Pierce, Principal Product Manager at Rapid7. It's a cybersecurity platform company.
And I'm Pedram Amini, CTO for InQuest.net. We are mostly a cybersecurity solution that's deployed in the DoD and federal space.
Okay, great. So the first question that I'd like to ask you guys is, let's talk about the white hat machine learning space. Can you, each of you, describe what is going on there and how important it is versus the hype that we've been hearing about?
Yeah, so security has a scale problem right now. We have a ton of data. We don't have enough experts to look at that data. And then maybe which is unique about cybersecurity is we have people constantly attacking us, and not only the human element, but the data portion of it. I think for the last 5+ years, we've been looking to machine learning to try to take our experience and our knowledge and turn it into a model that can kind of evaluate bad. And it's been pretty effective, but I think it's really early stages before it's something that can completely revolutionize cybersecurity.
Yeah, there's certainly some hype behind it. I mean, there's definitely a lot of FUD-based marketing, especially in our industry. With 3,500 security vendors out there, a lot of people are going to be especially talking beyond what the tech is actually capable of. But it certainly has kind of leveled the playing field. When Cody and I first started in this business in the 90s, there was no such thing as a cybersecurity job. Attacks were mostly like researchers doing the kind of work that we're now getting paid to do. We were just kind of doing it for fun at the time, trying to figure out how systems worked. Fast forward to today, and you've got an exponential growth curve when it comes to malware. I mean, the graph is like this. And there's a massive a shortage of analysts, and there's a lot of frustration in the analyst space as well. People don't want to sit around all day and deal with either false positives or coming out of your traditional like signature-based detection mechanisms, or even just dealing with the massive volume of malware that's going on. So, I feel like on the attacker side, they've had somewhat of an advantage in recent history with just the massive explosion of activity that they have going on. And so even though we have a lack of defenders overall in the space, the ML AI scene has, to some degree, leveled the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, I think we actually absolutely have to adopt it just to scale. But it's proved itself very useful in certain situations, and then the others we just need to get better at kind of codifying our industry knowledge.
Todd earlier from Bology, which was a great talk, really well presented as well. He had talked about the massive explosion of data and how, what was it, something like 80% of the world's data?
I think it was 90.
It was built in the past. It has been produced in the last 2 years. This trend is not going to end. It's going to continue going down that path. So, as far as I'm concerned, while there is some hype and there is some promise, it certainly is going to be the way of the future. Like, you're going to have the virtual analyst to deal with the scale of the problem as we continue to grow.
As the device, all the devices explode, what do you see as what needs to occur in this space to ensure that the white hats keep the advantage?
Obviously, just large technological advancements, staying ahead of the curve. One of the things that we're probably going to see coming in the not so distant future, and I'm certain that there's at least nation-state level actors who are playing with this kind of counter technology. But at some point, you're going to see the adoption of these same ML techniques, on the adversary side. It's again, just from another talk today, I think it was the farming one, talking about how our AI things are basically tools. They're tools in a toolbox. And so on the white hat side, we've picked up these tools and started using them sooner than they've been adopted on the black hat side. But for sure, that's going to change in the not so distant future, assuming that's not going on now.
Yeah, and I think security has some unique barriers that we have to consider. We have GDPR in Europe. We had data security, trust, transparency, governance, all these different things, because at the end of the day, security really does need to look at every piece of information in order to make a decision on whether it's a threat or not. And so that adds a kind of another difficulty to pushing as far forward as we want to with new technologies and new innovations. So it, having more, having more things planned for ahead of time, how we think about AI and machine learning and data access in a world where we also have policies that are good policies that allow people to trust the cloud and vendors with their data, is one of the challenges. I mean, it's potentially, I think, unique, or one of the more unique features of cybersecurity in general.
Talk a little bit more about the types of adversaries there are. Are there different kinds that are new that both of you are seeing?
Adversaries, I think it would be a disservice to try to put a label on what the adversary looks like. They are numerous, diverse. It's not a teenager in a basement. It can be nation states with millions and millions of dollars and tens of thousands of highly skilled and trained military personnel. It could be one person that just has a curiosity. So when we think about the adversary, we usually think about intent. Is it financial? Is it intellectual property? Is it reputational damage? And we can kind of anecdotally map that to whether it's China or Russia, whether they're stealing intellectual property. There's cases, I think, to really prove the point there. But my response would be that adversaries are a constant, and that's the hard part. Adversaries, when we're all connected in the cloud, are now a 24/7 problem, and not something that you can just step away from. So I'd say that maybe a little different way to frame it, but it's a constant threat.
Yeah. I mean, it really depends on, I think the adversary that you care about will of course depend on who you are as well. For someone sitting at home, the garden variety malware, kind of like that cosmic background radiation of malware that's going across the wire, is something of concern for them. Whereas, if you're sitting in the basement of the Pentagon, what's valuable to you is ensuring that people aren't coming in and stealing secrets. So there's an adversary out there for every single type of person, every single kind of data. From someone who wants to get into your cell phone because they want to see your private pictures, to someone who's trying to steal intellectual property, perhaps for corporate espionage or algorithmic stealing. You even see some of this in case studies today. What is it? Uber and Waymo have this issue with some kind of cross-hacking, IP theft kind of thing going on. So as Cody says, it's all over the place.
What about the other side? How close would each of you say the black hats are to adopting machine learning or obtaining machine learning for their attacks?
It's hard to say. I can give you this example though. If you look at a common malware campaign from 5-10 years ago, it almost yells at you that it's malware. It's poorly written, it's broken English, there's misspellings, the attachment kind of stands out. And so I feel like now we're in a phase where people are using their human intelligence to do better jobs at producing lures or masking their network activity, for example, to hide among other normal types of network activity. But no doubt what's going to end up happening is these same tools will be used such that, to say, for example, this is ridiculous to me, this business even exists, but the fake invoice business where you can just send invoices to companies and people might pay them is worth billions of dollars. And that's with today's crappy wording and lackluster techniques. Imagine it reaches the point where someone's looking at the social networks of the people who are at the company, looking at the vernacular that they use, like learning about the kinds of times that they're actually speaking online or they're active or they're at work, and leveraging that to take advantage of human trust to then get at what they're looking for. I'll give you a modern example that I heard from a friend. a grandmother, her son was in Mexico, and somehow, his Facebook was public, and so someone had figured that out, and pretending to be him, contacted the grandmother saying that he was in trouble looking for a Western Union payment, utilizing that publicly available information to provide a convincing story. Luckily she was able to, give another nephew a call to prevent her from giving away those finances, but that's an example of how, increased knowledge of your target, whether it's manual analysis or automation, is going to essentially help you get to your, when I say help you, I'm talking about from the black hat perspective, help you ascertain your goal.
And then there's a real practical example of this. So the first thing that cybersecurity tried to apply ML to is a malware problem. It was a large labeled data set. Google actually has a service called VirusTotal where you can upload a malicious or a non-malicious executable, and it runs 30 to 40 different vendors' AV software on it and tells you if it's malicious or not malicious. Probably 30% of those are machine learning next-gen AV, so you can upload something and see how the model would have predicted it. Adversaries now are using two techniques to help them be more successful. One is to test what the model is picking up on as a feature and kind of changing their tactics. The other is to force model drift. So if they push a million different malicious binaries up there, they might be able to make a model less accurate intentionally towards some feature set, because most of executables and in most of computing, it's a very defined data type. And typically machine learning in the malware case is picking up on those different feature vectors. So they can push it around and they'll use that to hopefully just kind of mess with the model and hopefully it drifts far enough for them to be successful. So there's different types of attacks.
I mean, essentially what he's talking about there is like slow boiling a frog. Right? Like if you quickly throw the heat at a frog, it's going to jump out of that pot. But you can essentially, this ML drift that he's describing, you slowly make the defenders essentially accept your malware as otherwise goodware, because you've slowly exposed it to the model, slowly trickled it in.
Is that something that is happening right now, or is this something that you see evolving in the near future, the midterm future?
It absolutely is happening now. I'll say that vendors in the next-gen AV space are aware of it. They take model drift very seriously. They have ways to push down newly trained models that perform well. What performed well 6 months ago might perform very poorly now. So I'd say it is absolutely a problem. It's a problem maybe now more just through a natural evolution of the attacker, but you're seeing more and more that it's not an evolution, an accidental evolution. It's more of an intentional evolution on their part.
And this somewhat ties back to your previous question on, what do we do to ensure that white hats have the advantage? One of the things that Cody and I discussed is just access to data. Like our ability to produce, machine learning models is entirely predicated on our ability to gain access to relevant, real, and labeled data. And so one of the kind of the high-level things that we talk about is how some of these companies that have just inherent access to it, like your Googles of the world, they have a major unfair advantage in just the vast amount of data that they have. So we can see, maybe in the future somehow there'll be some form of like consortium of trusted people who would get access to, somewhat anonymized data so that they can build accurate and valuable models. As it stands now, for example, as a smaller startup, we have to lean on a lot of publicly available sources and garner from publicly available sources that are also susceptible to either poisoning by way of adversary or just falling out of touch. Whatever data set you're looking at now is going to be different than what the data set looks like 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now. So you need to have a constant supply of data and well-labeled data in order to keep your models sharp, so to speak.
One thing that is interesting to me is how it seems that the black hats always have an advantage if the white hats are understaffed. And if there's no way to increase the staff and the Black Hats have machine learning adoption happening, how is it possible to fight against then?
Well, I mean, that's a philosophical question.
Okay.
You know, I've heard it put in a pretty good way, and that's that the defender has to be right 100% of the time, and the attacker needs to be right just once. I think where we see optimism is that the attacker by nature is going to do something that deviates from the norm. So I believe that there is a world where it's harder for them to look normal than it is for us to detect normal or to detect abnormal situations. So that's some optimism. I mean, that's obviously a long, long way off. The other optimism is security should not necessarily be a trade secret. Security should be a best practice for all businesses and nations and whatnot. So hopefully we can get to a point where we're also out sharing. So let's say one oil and gas company gets breached or detects abnormal, and instantly that pattern is pushed out to everyone else, and they're getting value out of it. So you know, that's maybe the optimistic kind of view of it, but it's a constant battle.
And the other way of looking at it also is the fundamental platforms are changing too. Like one of the things I do as we're all over the place here, right? We're talking about corporations, we're talking about individual users, and one of the things I push, for example, on family, friends, parents, is just a change in platform. Right? So if you're using an iOS, iPhone, or an iPad, you just have a lot less exposure. So while breach of a ecosystem where you've got thousands of endpoints, many computers, firewalls, configurations, things like this are changing, there's going to be a way, as Cody says, you got to be right. All the attacker needs to do is get it right once, and they're in. So as far as the end user is concerned, there's hope for them in just the solidification of the underlying platforms. But then that same model of they only have to be right once is flipped when it comes into the law enforcement and legal aspect of it. Because you have essentially time is on the attacker side when it comes to getting into the breach, but then when it comes into the investigation and finding who it is, time is now on the defender side again. I mean, look at the indictments from Mueller for the Russian hacking. I mean, the thing reads beautifully. The amount of information they're able to pull together, they have pictures of these guys essentially behind their computer screens. And so the shaming, the punishing, perhaps the ability to essentially track down after the fact forensically who did what might be the eventual thing that kind of levels the playing field there.
Okay. I mean, we have a lot of room to grow. We need policy, we need law, we need a lot of different aspects that help us as a deterrent. I think one of the probably weakest spots in our modern society is a deterrence of cyber attack. There's just, there's no punishment for getting even caught. So at that point, you're not going to deter anybody from it.
Give us your sketch, each of you, on the future of machine learning as you see it in your space.
Sure. I mean, in general, I see ML as becoming ubiquitous, not just in our space, but across every space. I mean, the same way that you have, like, a database is ubiquitous now. They're everywhere. Apps have them, like servers have them. I think ML is going to be everywhere. The explosion of data is so large that, fast forward whatever it is, 50 years, 100 years from now, the entire combined efforts of humanity won't be able to monitor the amount of data that's coming out. So fundamentally, I just see it moving to a place where it's going to become a lot more organic, cellular, kind of the same way our body is with an immune system. Every component will have some potential ability to communicate, what's going on with itself, and you'll reach a point where essentially you can get sick and you can heal. I mean, but this is, way down the future talk kind of thing.
I think it'll get bad before it gets worse. I think we are connecting so many devices. Our cars are going to be autonomous. Everything will be in the realm of possible to attack. And I think we're going to have to try really hard to apply security kind of fundamentals from the beginning when we start as a society to innovate and to build. As far as I mean, I agree with Pedram. I mean, we have to have AI. We have to have machine learning. Hopefully, we can get to a point where we have the human element, where we have enough people staffed in cybersecurity, when we have enough education for cybersecurity, research. All of these things have in computer science have been around for 80 years, and we're so far behind on the security side. So we need all that to kind of mature enough to a point where I think we'll start to get some parity with the attackers. And then I think, as we mentioned before, they'll learn how to apply similar techniques to avoid, and we'll play the cat and mouse game forever. But hopefully we've learned enough to where it's not such a devastating attack like it would be on our elections and critical infrastructure and things of that nature. I mean, it's a tough problem. It really is.
How do you see a true virtual assistant based on ML evolving compared to simply what seems to be what we have now or in the near future with humans and ML?
So there's a process to cybersecurity. You protect, you detect, and then you respond and recover. And that's a pretty lengthy process. Usually takes multiple people. If you were hire 4 people, you would have one as a specialist in each, and then they would have to go and talk to each other. And so the attacker is able to basically breach a network, spend a lot of time there, get comfortable, and I think the dwell time is what we call it, is basically the first time that you detect someone has infiltrated your network is in the months. So I think a virtual analyst or virtual security person would be able to handle all of that autonomously. So we need autonomous security, which is the decision and action piece, and then reporting and the information with the human analysts. I think it takes shape like that first, where we're mostly scaling out the human aspect, but it's very light touch per incident.
Yeah, I mean, today it's entirely about focusing the human cognition on where it's best spent. Right? A lot of time has traditionally been wasted in recent history on doing things that a machine is otherwise better at doing. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't need to take breaks, doesn't get emotional, doesn't have a bad fight with his spouse that morning and is like incapable of doing their job. But where it goes in the future, it's hard to say. Time will tell, essentially.
Great. Last thoughts.
I guess last thoughts are think about security everywhere. It's when we started, we could barely tell our families what we did because they had no context. And over the last decade, maybe even the last 2 years, that context is becoming reality. Mm-hmm. So we have attacks on our elections, we have attacks on our businesses, we have attacks everywhere. And the parting thought would just be that security is absolutely fundamental to stability. So consider it. Consider how you're thinking about it. Not everyone's going to be an expert, but it should be not an afterthought.
I mean, for me, I'll just leave with the space is fascinating. It always has been. It's why I initially got into it in the first place. Why Cody got into it. They were self-taught. Just get access to some computer system and play around with it and excel at it. I look forward to kind of the continued cat and mouse game of ML. One of the fun examples that I'll leave you guys with, and this is a real world example, is essentially hacking with machine vision, right? And so some proof of concepts that have been developed is maybe you have facial recognition software that might see me as me, but then I can put on a special pair of glasses that has like a noise pattern around the actual lens, so that when the machine looks at me, even though I'm not wearing a mask of any kind, suddenly it thinks that I'm Cody. And so my brain likes to think about what kinds of things that means going in the future. Will people start pranking self-driving cars with a projection from the back of theirs that results in it thinking there's like a stroller on the road and it goes off the side? It's a non-stop cat and mouse game, and I look forward to seeing where it goes. ML has essentially opened the entire range, and it's very exciting.
All right. Thanks very much, both of you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks.